Morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Good Chodesh Tov. We are learning Mishnah Megillah, Parag Gimel, Chapter 3, Mishnah Gimel, Mishnah 3. Okay. V'oid Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said an additional thing. Beis HaKnesses Shecharav. The previous Mishnah was talking about selling a shul. This Mishnah now talks about a Beis HaMikdash that fell into ruin. It's not used anymore. For whatever reason, it fell into ruin. Okay, so it's not being used anymore. Well, what could you use it for? What can't you use it for? So it says, Ein maspidin b'seichai. You cannot use it for making eulogies. My understanding is that, you're talking about you're talking about a large area. You need a lot of place for a lot of people. These shuls were large areas, and that is not being used. Maybe use it at least for eulogizing. And we say, no, you can't. Now, the idea behind everything said in this Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda considers a synagogue to retain its holiness as long as it's still designated for its mitzvah, right? That's what we had yesterday. If it's not designated for the mitzvah anymore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, then it loses its sanctity. And not only according to that, in the case of selling it, Rabbi Yehuda said, you actually have to declare that you're selling it for a non-sanctified purpose. But without that, it still retains its holiness as long as it's still designated for its mitzvah. So Rabbi Yehuda holds that even a ruined synagogue may yet return to its use as a house of prayer. Therefore, it is still holy. You could argue, same way you sell it, right? It loses its holiness. It goes into ruin. It's not going to be used anymore. The whole point, according to Rabbi Yehuda, as we learned yesterday, was that a shul, a synagogue, is tashmish kedusha. It's like an object used for a mitzvah. Well, if it's no more designated for the mitzvah, it doesn't have any holiness anymore. So one could say the same, and therefore, if you sell it for a non-sanctified purpose, it's not holy anymore. So one would think that maybe in a situation like this also, because the shul fell into ruin, not being used anymore very clearly, the sanctity goes off. Yehuda says no, the sanctity remains. The explanation bring down here in the notes is that, well, it was once a shul and may become a shul again. And therefore, it's still considered designated for the purposes of the mitzvah of davening, of prayer, and therefore the sanctity still remains. And therefore, you cannot eulogize someone in it. Now, that rule about not eulogizing someone is that it's a general rule, right? You sure doesn't have to be ruined for it. Like I say, the whole point is that all the things mentioned here are things that pertain to a active shul. Yehuda says even applies after the shul becomes inactive. So when you talk about making a eulogy for a person, we're talking about bringing in the nifter, bringing in the person who passed away, and eulogizing, right? And eulogizing. So the point is that when it says you can't eulogize someone, that means a regular person, a Torah scholar we know can be eulogized in a synagogue. So therefore, here too, if we're talking about a Torah scholar, you're able to do it. Here we're talking about not for a Torah scholar, where we say you don't do the eulogy in the shul. The ein mavshilan b'seichai chavolim. You also cannot make ropes in it. Twist ropes, a little translation. You cannot twist ropes, nor can you spread out nets. Now, these are things that you need a lot of room for, right? The ropes are very long, the nets are very wide. So now a ruined shul is going to be the best price for it because it's a wide open area. You could spread things out. So the Mishnah says, no, you can't do that. You have to still treat it as a shul. And the point, as pointed out by the Bar Tanura, it's not only these things, right? You can't use it, to I don't know, something. It's not just the ropes and it's not just the nets. It's any kind of, basically to use it now for some kind of non-sanctified purpose. You can't do any of that in this ruined shul. The examples here were given were the ones that would be most commonly go ahead. No one would just open up a lemonade stand in a ruined shul, right? But if you're talking about a wide open space like a shul, which now you can use for spreading out the rope and spreading out the nets, that would be the most common use to do with it. And for that, the Mishnah, that's why these were the examples used by the Mishnah. Nor can you use its roof to spread out fruits to dry out on top of them. You can't turn it into what's a kapandria? Shortcut. That's the word used for a shortcut. It's kind of like it's a word. Kapandria, they say, is a combination of words. Basically means dare admekifna dare eol baha, which means instead of having to go the long way around, I'll just cut through. Okay, a shortcut. That's the source. That's how this word kapandria came about to be used as a shortcut. It's kind of it's taking a bunch of words and putting them together and putting them together, contracting them together. Okay, so and you can't do that. Shenema, as the pasuk says, and I shall make your sanctuaries desolate. So the fact that the pasuk calls them sanctuaries, even when talking about desolation, that means kedushasan af kashen shememin. Their sanctity remains, even though they are destroyed, even though they're desolate. So I don't know if this is meant to actually be and we know that a synagogue is called a mikdash ma'an. It's called a miniature sanctuary. So therefore, when the pasuk says, "I will make your sanctuaries desolate," which means that even when they're desolate, they're still considered sanctuaries. That applies. The pasuk was talking about the Beis HaMikdash, but we apply that to a shul also. That's called a mikdash ma'at, a minor sanctuary. Now, what's interesting is it would sound like from the Mishnah that you have a source to this, but in essence, it really seems to be that the way they explained it before, in as I mentioned from the note before, it really has a lot. It really has a lot to do with the concept that we said before of tashmishay kedusha, of tashmishay not kedusha. Kedusha mitzvah, tashmishay mitzvah, something that's used for the purpose of a mitzvah. That's the essence here. Maybe this pasuk is like, I called it a samach. It's an illusion. There's a hint to it to the concept. I don't think it's a real. It's meant to be the source. And I don't know. Maybe it's the source for the idea of tashmishay mitzvah. But just that, I mean, the Mishnah brings the pasuk, but as we said before, it follows the it follows the parameters of tashmishay mitzvah. That something designated for a mitzvah still it has a certain sanctity to it. Although the shul is desolate right now, it's in ruin, but it's still considered designated for the mitzvah, and therefore retains the same sanctity that it had, the same laws that it had when it was still active. It has even now. The Mishnah concludes, let's say grass is growing in it, right? The floors, there's grass growing, which is very disturbing. Lo yitleish. You're not supposed to tear them out. You might think, well, at least, let the place have a little respect. Tear out the grass. The answer is no. Mipnei agmas nefesh. The point is for distress. We want people to see it. We want people to be distressed over it. And actually, because of that distress, they'll actually rebuild it, or at least pray that it should be rebuilt. So we don't want it to have this like nice manicured, so to speak, look. We'd rather have that very desolate and abandoned look to cause people sorrow, and because of that will motivate them either to rebuild it or at least to go ahead and to pray that it should be rebuilt. Tanura adds, interestingly, that so why are you gathering up this grass, right? So you'd say make it look nice, maybe want to feel it to animals. Right? Yeah, but those would be examples where you're going to uproot the grass and you're going to remove it. But let's say for some reason you decide to, gather the grass together and kind of like leave it in a pile. Kind of like, like in some ways or another, give it a little bit respect, but the grass is still there, which means you remember the grass was there. So the Ratanura says that's enough. That's enough for the distress. As long as the grass is there, then the halacha is that then you could actually uproot it, because the main point is for the grass to be there to bring this distress to people so that they should either want to rebuild it or pray that it should be rebuilt. Have a wonderful day, wonderful Shabbos, good Chodesh Tov, Ol Mazel.
What's the story with Barry?